All right, everybody. OG Roz in the building. I'm tired tonight. Had a busy day, but you know what? I am still going to post this video tonight. A lot happened today, and I can't wait to get into it with you. So if you're new here and you are interested in this trial, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And hit the bell notification symbol so you won't miss an upload. All right, y'all. The trial of the century. I'm talking about the Keefe D trial for the murder of Tupac Shakur. All right, so I gathered my notes here. Let's get ready to rumble. All right, so let me get to the top of the list here. Okay, I have a lot of notes here. But you know, today's court was more interesting than yesterday. And it just flat out made me mad. I don't know about y'all, but it just flat out made me angry and frustrated today. And as I get into it, I will tell you why. So I have quite a bit to cover today. So let's get to the top of my thing. You know, this whole case has had me up late at night, like thinking of all these questions and looking for answers, and you know, they're driving me nuts with this, okay? All right. How many Tupac fans we have in here? Well, you know what? It's not about whether you are a Tupac fan or not, or whether you like Keefe D or not, or if you support the Crips or the Bloods. This is about justice, God's justice. This case, this outcome, this verdict is going to come out the way God plans it. He's in control. Don't think that the jury is in control, or the lawyers, or the judge. No. Because the Lord, He sees everything. He knows what happened. He knows the truth, okay? And He knows the outcome. So let's get up and deeper into this Tupac Shakur murder investigation. All right. As I've been following this Keefe D trial, I keep coming back to one major question. How did we get to the story prosecutors are presenting today? Was Greg Kading right? Was Russell Poole onto something? What did the eyewitnesses actually say? And how do people like Frank Alexander, Michael Moore, Reggie Wright Jr., Reggie Wright Sr., David Kenner, Chuck Phillips, Sean Combs, Orlando Anderson, and Keefe D fit into this? Today we are going to separate documented facts, allegations, and competing theories, because somebody Having a theory doesn't make that theory a fact. All right, so let's go back to Las Vegas. No worries, I am going to get into the events of today, but this is just kind of let's just go back a little bit. Tupac Shakur, he attends the Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand, right? And after the fight, surveillance video captures Tupac, Suge Knight, and several members of their entourage attacking Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, a South Side Compton Crip. So approximately 2.5 hours later, Tupac is riding in a BMW driven by Suge Knight. A white Cadillac pulls alongside them. Shots are fired. Tupac is mortally wounded. Suge is injured. And from that moment forward, one of the biggest mysteries in music history begins. And here it is 30 days later, okay? Orlando. Let's talk about Orlando. Orlando is extremely important because the theory that he was involved didn't begin with Greg Kading. Did you know that? Authorities in Compton suspected very early that Tupac's murder could have been retaliation for the MGM beating. Orlando denied killing Tupac. He was never convicted or even tried for Tupac's murder. And then in 1998, Orlando himself was killed in an unrelated shooting. That means Orlando died approximately a decade before Keefe D gave the cooperation statement that became so important to Greg Kading's investigation. So Orlando never had the opportunity to answer Keefe's allegations. Remember that. Now, Frank Alexander. Now let's talk about someone who was actually there. Frank Alexander was Tupac's bodyguard. Alexander was traveling in the convoy when Tupac was shot. In 1997, Los Angeles Times report, Alexander said he got a brief look at the shooter's face and thought he might possibly be able to identify that person. But Alexander complained that investigators had never brought him in for a lineup. Wait, hold on, let me get comfortable, y'all. I'm so hard over here. Subscribe now. I want to subscribe to the channel. Give me a little encouragement. You know I'm doing this for free. Okay. That raises a question. I think it deserves serious attention. If you have an eyewitness who believes he may recognize the shooter, why wasn't that identification opportunity pursued more aggressively? And there's another important distinction. Witnesses describe 4 men inside the Cadillac is not the same as witnesses independently identifying those men as Keefe D, Orlando, DeAndre Smith, and Terrence Brown. Those are 2 completely different evidentiary questions. Michael Moore. Now enter Michael Moore, another member of Death Row Security. Moore has discussed something that has fueled alternative theories for years. Death Row's secret arrangement that night. Questions have been raised about who was armed, who wasn't armed, who was assigned to protect Tupac, and why certain security decisions were made. Those questions became part of documentary. But again, questions are not proof of conspiracy. We have to separate the two. Then Russell Poole. Now we get to Russell Poole. Watch that movie, City of Lies. It's supposed to tell the Russell Poole story. Poole was an LAPD detective investigating the murder of Biggie Smalls. His investigation led him towards something completely different from the theory of Kading, from the theory of Greg Kading. Poole became concerned about relationships involving death row records, gang-affiliated individuals, and law enforcement officers working around death row. Poole's work ultimately became associated with allegations involving corrupt police officers and death row connections. His story later became part of the inspiration for City of Lies, with Johnny Depp portraying Poole. But remember, City of Lies is a dramatized movie. Johnny Depp's dialogue is not automatically Russell Poole's actual testimony. If we're investigating Poole, we need Poole's interviews, investigative records, and other original sources. Man, my neck hurt. Reggie Wright Jr. This brings us to Reggie Wright Jr. Wright was a former Compton police officer who became heavily involved with security at Death Row Records. That made him particularly interesting to Poole. Poole investigated relationships between death row security and off-duty law enforcement officers. Wright has repeatedly denied allegations connecting him to Tupac's murder. So let me emphasize, suspicion is not evidence of guilt. But if we're examining Poole's investigation, Wright is an important part of understanding where Poole was looking and why. Reggie Wright Sr. And then there's Reggie Wright Sr. Wright Sr. was involved with the Compton Police Department, including gang enforcement. So you had an unusual situation here. The father was involved in Compton law enforcement and gang investigation. His son had been a police officer and became a major security figure at Death Row. Does that prove a conspiracy? Absolutely not. But it helps explain why investigators examining relationships between death row, gangs, and law enforcement took an interest in these connections. David Kenner. Then we have attorney David Kenner. Kenner represented Suge Knight and had enormous importance within the death row world. He was also involved with Tupac's legal affairs after Tupac joined Death Row. After Tupac's death, his mother, Afeni Shakur, became involved in litigation with Death Row, and disputes arose concerning Tupac's business arrangements. There have been countless theories involving Kenner over the years. But here's where I draw the line. I have not seen reliable evidence establishing that David Kenner participated in Tupac's murder. Business disputes and potential conflicts are one thing. Murder conspiracy is something entirely different. Chuck Phillips. Now this gets really interesting. Before Greg Kading became famous for the Keefe D confession, journalist Chuck Phillips published a major investigation in 2002. And Phillips was already presenting a theory involving Orlando Anderson, the Southside Compton Crips, MGM beating, and retaliation. Think about that timeline. 2002. Keefe D's proper statements came years later. So Greg Kading did not invent the Southside Crips retaliation theory. It existed long before Keefe's recorded cooperation. Isn't that interesting? Okay, I thought Keefe D had I thought that Greg Kading was just feeding dialogue to Keefe. So there goes that defense out the window. Okay, but Phillips' reporting also included controversial allegations involving Biggie. Okay, and years later, an entirely separate Phillips story concerning Tupac's 1994 quad studio shooting had to be retracted by the Los Angeles Times after the FBI documents underlying that story were determined to be fabricated. So that doesn't automatically invalidate his separate 2002 Las Vegas investigation, though. But it absolutely means we should scrutinize sources carefully. Greg Kading in Murder Rap. Now we arrive at Greg Kading. Kading's investigation produced the story most people recognize today. Keefe D told investigators that he was inside that white Cadillac. According to Keefe's account, the four men were associated with the Southside Compton Crips, and Orlando Anderson was identified as the shooter. That story became central to Kading's book and documentary, Murder Rap. But here's my question. How much of Kading's conclusion is independently corroborated? Because saying four men were inside the Cadillac doesn't automatically establish these exact four men were inside the Cadillac, and that's something I'm watching very closely during this trial. The proffer. And we cannot discuss Kading without discussing Keefe D's proffer agreement. Why do I always do that? Keefe was facing serious legal pressure when he agreed to cooperate. That doesn't mean what he said was false, though, but it gives us a legitimate reason to ask, what incentive did Keefe have to talk? And more importantly, which part of his story can be corroborated without using Keefe's own words? Because Keefe subsequently repeated versions of this story publicly, and now his defense argues that some of those statements weren't truthful. So we have a fascinating credibility problem here. If Keefe D lies, when was he lying? When he denied involvement? When he admitted involvement? When he discussed it publicly? Or when he later claimed parts of the story were fabricated? That's why independent evidence matters so much. Sean Diddy Combs. Keefe D alleged that Combs had previously offered $1 million to have Tupac and Suge killed. Greg Kading publicized that allegation. Combs denied it. And I want to be very clear. Sean Combs has not been convicted or charged with Tupac's murder based upon that allegation. Keefe saying something happened does not establish that it happened. So here's another question. What independent evidence corroborates that alleged $1 million offer? That's what I want to see. Murder Rap versus Battle for Compton. Now you can understand why these documentaries feel like they're describing completely different cases. Now, I have not watched the Battle for Compton. I've seen Murder Rap. When I have a chance, I am going to try to watch that, though. Now you can understand why these documentaries feel like they're describing completely different cases. Murder Rap, Greg Kading's investigation. Keefe D, Orlando Anderson, Southside Crips, retaliation for the MGM beating, white Cadillac. Okay, and then the Battle for Compton is a dramatically different investigative direction associated with Russell Poole's later work. It deals with death row, security, law enforcement connections, internal relationships, and theories suggesting something much larger may have been happening. Those theories have not been proven in court. The City of Lies. Johnny Depp plays Russell Poole. I saw that movie. It's a good movie. But that movie focuses primarily on Poole's investigation of Biggie's murder and alleged LAPD corruption. Tupac's murder is part of the larger story, but don't watch City of Lies thinking it's simply the Russell Poole version of murder rap. They're very different productions, okay? So, the question that matters in 2026, and now here we are, 30 years later, Keefe D is actually on trial. So for the first time, we have an opportunity to watch pieces of this story tested in a courtroom. And that's what I'm interested in. Not rumors, not documentaries, not YouTube briefs, evidence. Who independently places Keefe D inside that Cadillac? Who independently places Orlando Anderson inside that Cadillac? Who identified the shooter? What did the witnesses say in 96 and 97 before books and documentaries influenced the public narrative? What physical or circumstantial evidence corroborate Keefe D's confession? And when witnesses contradict each other, who has evidence supporting their version? So I'm not ready to call Greg Kading a fraud, but he has some questionable history in the law enforcement. And I'm not ready to declare Russell Poole completely right. And I'm certainly not going to declare somebody a murderer based on documentary. I'm doing something different. I'm putting their stories against each other. Russell Poole, Greg Kading, Chuck Phillips, Frank Alexander, Michael Moore, Reggie Wright Sr., David Kenner, Sean Combs, Orlando Anderson, and finally, Duane Keefe D. Davis. Because somewhere inside 30 years of interviews, police investigations, documentaries, accusations, denials, and contradictions, there are facts. And this trial may finally tell us which pieces can actually withstand scrutiny. So from a spiritual perspective, and as always, Proverbs 18:17, it teaches that the first person to present a case can appear right until the other side comes forward and examines that story. I will put that scripture in the description box, okay? So that's exactly why we shouldn't automatically accept the first convincing story we hear. We need to listen, examine, compare, and seek truth. Because ultimately, human beings can get investigations wrong. Witnesses can lie. People can misunderstand what they saw. Evidence can be interpreted differently. But God knows exactly what happened on that September 7th, 96 day. 30 years doesn't change the truth. A documentary doesn't change the truth. A confession doesn't change the truth. And a conspiracy theory doesn't change the truth. The truth is the truth. Okay, and as this trial continues, that's what we're going to keep searching for. The truth. All right. So now, the other question I had was, who got Tupac's murder right, Kading or Poole? Who do you think? Who did Suge Knight say got it right, Greg Kading or Russell Poole? At first, I thought the answer was Russell Poole, but when I started digging deeper, I realized something important. There have been reports over the years claiming Suge supported theories associated with Poole, in the battle for Compton. But Shug's attorney disputed reports that Shug had confirmed that entire theory. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you Shug said Russell Poole solved Tupac's murder. I can't establish that. But that question sent me down a rabbit hole, because then I started asking, what exactly did Russell Poole believe? What does Greg Kading believe? What did Frank Alexander say? What did Michael Moore say? And where do Reggie Wright Jr. and his father fit? What about David Kenner, Chuck Phillips, Sean Combs, Orlando? And then I started thinking about all these movies and documentaries like Murder Rap, Tupac Assassination, Battle for Compton, and City of Lies. Are these productions telling us the same story? No, they're not, absolutely. They're presenting radically different pictures of what may have happened. So today we're putting them all on the table though. Now, but I will talk more about that tomorrow. Okay, so let's get into what happened today. Let me scroll to that part of my notes. Oh yes, I have a lot of notes, y'all. Let's get to that. And I hope that I'm not repeating the same notes that I repeated yesterday. Oh well. So let's get. Oh, my foot is going numb, y'all. Oh my goodness. While I'm getting ready to pull up my notes from today's court, let me go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you, Lord, so much for the opportunity to just be on this channel, to be able to look at things from a Christian perspective, to help us to remember that that this trial is in your hands, Lord, and whatever happens is happening in accordance with your will, not ours, and that we not hold favoritism toward one person or the other, because just because we like a person or don't like a person, that does not make them guilty or innocent. So I just pray, Lord, that we be able to look at this with clear eyes and an open mind, and ultimately not forgetting who we are as Christ followers. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right. So what I forgot to touch on was Ingrid Stokes, the woman that was in the other car. So I don't want to overlook her. So she testified yesterday, and I brought her up because when I was going through the testimony and interviews surrounding this case, I realized that there were eyewitnesses whose accounts don't always receive the same attention as Keefe D's later statements. So Stokes is important because she was connected to another vehicle around the scene of the Las Vegas shooting. And this is exactly the kind of witness testimony that we need to be paying attention to. Why? Because remember what I've been asking throughout this investigation. What did people who were actually there say? Not 20 years later, not after Murder Rap, not after Keefe D starting doing interviews, not after documentaries had been made. I'm interested in what eyewitnesses describe from their own positions around the scene and how those accounts compare with the narrative we eventually received from Keefe D. Miss Stokes is part of that eyewitness picture. And when we went through the trial material, her name appeared alongside other witnesses, including Gary Dale, Fred Miller, and Brent Becker. So I don't want her testimony disappearing underneath all the famous names, because this case isn't going to be solved simply by asking, do I believe Greg Kading or do I believe Russell Poole? The better question is, what does the independent evidence say, right? So Ingrid Stokes, and also the people that were traveling in and around the convoy, the witnesses on Las Vegas Boulevard, the officers and investigators who arrived immediately afterward. And then we got to compare those accounts with what Keefe D said years later. That's the comparison I'm interested in. Okay. So, okay, that's all good. But hold on, y'all. My foot is going like completely numb. That's all. I don't know why. Okay, much better. Don't know why, because I went on a long walk today. Okay. I need to get to witness. I apologize, y'all. Okay, here we go. Day 2 update. All right. So today they talked about the autopsy evidence. Mob James is interviewed. Yes, y'all. And Reggie Wright Jr. takes the stand. So we heard about Tupac's actual injuries. The jury saw autopsy photographs. And we saw MGM Grand surveillance footage. We heard testimony about Orlando Anderson. And we heard about evidence recovered from the shooting scene. Then the afternoon took a completely different turn. Mob James Macdonald took the stand and made it very clear that he did not want to testify against Keefe D. And then Reggie Wright Jr. took the stand. So let's start at that beginning, okay? So first, Fred Miller. Recording continues, okay? The Fred Miller recording. So the recording that this is talking about is yesterday. There was a recording of a dialogue between Keefe D and some other LAPD officers, okay? And then court today, it began by finishing that testimony connected to the retired LAPD homicide detective Fred Miller and an old recorded interview involving Keefe D. So remember, Miller was involved in the investigation of the murder of Christopher Wallace, the notorious B.I.G. But the jury was specifically told that neither LAPD nor the court is saying Keefe D was involved in Biggie's murder. The defense asked Miller whether his investigation ever uncovered evidence that Biggie or Sean Combs owed Keefe money. Miller answered, not that he was aware of. That's worth remembering because of all the different money stories that have been circulated around these cases. Remember, Keefe D said, did he owe him money? Okay, and then came Tupac's autopsy evidence. So during this time, things kind of got emotional. Several of Tupac's family members were there today. So some of them had to step out. They couldn't, of course, that's their family member. Some stepped out, some looked away. But Keefe D, it seemed like he just kept a straight face the whole time. In fact, most of today, he was just kind of had no emotion at all. Okay, so former crime scene analyst Thomas Kern testified about evidence collected during Tupac's autopsy. Okay, then forensic pathologist Dr. Lisa Gavin took the stand, and Dr. Gavin wasn't the doctor who performed Tupac's autopsy, because the original examiner has died since then. Okay, but she reviewed the records and photographs, and the jury was shown Tupac's autopsy photographs. This was apparently extremely difficult for Tupac's family. Some members of Tupac's family left before the photographs were shown, and others stayed. Tupac's cousin Zayed Akinyela, now I don't know how to pronounce that, y'all. He stayed, and he explained that learning exactly what happened helps him process almost 30 years of grief. Okay, sometimes everybody processes grief differently, you know? Like sometimes people just want to know. It's the not knowing that's so frustrating. And after seeing the photographs, he described feeling both angry and sad, of course. And that's powerful because we're talking about Tupac Shakur, the superstar, every day. But today the courtroom was confronted with Tupac Shakur, the 25-year-old human being who was violently killed. They showed like the green body bag that his body was in, and the tag attached to it had his name on it. So Dr. Gavin testified that Tupac died from gunshot wounds to his chest and abdomen, and classified his death as a homicide. She described multiple bullets. One bullet traveled through Tupac's chest and damaged a lung. That lung collapsed and bled so severely that doctors eventually removed it while trying to save his life. Other bullets damaged his intestines and additional areas of his body. And remember, Tupac survived for 6 days. What did No. He survived for 6 days after the shooting, okay? The jury even asked whether Tupac suffered a gunshot wound to the head. Dr. Gavin answered no. The jury also asked about the caliber of the bullets. She couldn't establish that all of the recovered bullets were the same caliber. So the jurors aren't just sitting there, they're asking questions. Okay, I'm going to keep watching those jury questions throughout this trial because they can sometimes give us clues about what details the jurors are focusing on. Okay, now the MGM Grand video. Michael Ingram is an MGM investigator. His purpose was largely to authenticate the old MGM surveillance footage. And the jury saw video from September 7, 96. That means the jury saw the event prosecutors say started the chain reaction leading to Tupac's murder. So you saw Orlando Anderson there. Then the footage shows Tupac and members of the entourage involved in the confrontation with Orlando Anderson, and prosecutors are going to argue MGM beating, retaliation, Tupac's murder, in that order. That's their motive theory. And then we heard about Orlando himself. Former Las Vegas Police Sergeant Kenneth Rios testified about encountering Orlando Anderson after the MGM incident. And this was interesting. According to Rios, Orlando essentially told police that people he didn't know had jumped him. Orlando reportedly didn't want medical treatment, and he didn't want to press charges. Because Orlando wasn't pursuing charges, no formal report was taken at that moment. Only after Tupac was shot did the officer begin recalling the MGM encounter and making notes from memory. That's something I'm keeping in my notebook, okay? Because once again, we're dealing with evidence reconstructed after another major event occurred. Then former Las Vegas officer and cold case investigator Dean O'Kelly testified. Evidence from the shooting scene was actually brought into court. O'Kelly said this was the closest he'd been to some of those items since '96, and when he had placed evidence markers over them at the scene. He suggested the weapon involved was a .40 caliber Glock. So now we're moving from stories and interviews into physical crime scene evidence, okay? And that is something I'm particularly interested in. Then came Mob James. Everybody, the tone changed after lunch. Mob James took the stand and he did not want to be there. And he said that he's a hostile witness. He's not there because he wanted to be there. He's there because he had to be there. He was subpoenaed. Prosecutors told the court he was appearing pursuant to a court order. So I think that's the same thing as a subpoena. So, and I think if you don't appear, then you could go to jail. So of course he's gonna appear. So Mob James said he knew Suge Knight and helped provide security around Suge's artists. He also said he was working security at Club 662 the night Tupac was shot. Okay, and then came in an interesting statement. Macdonald said he believed Tupac essentially inherited the conflict between Suge Knight and Puff. So it was never no East Coast, West Coast, or hostility between Southside Crips and Mob Piru. But then he said something else though. The beef was between Suge Knight and Keefe D. Now that caught my attention, because he not only said it was Suge versus Diddy before Tupac even came on the scene, but he also said it was a beef between Suge and Keefe D. So that gives us another layer beyond simply Tupac beat Orlando, so Orlando retaliated. It's more than that. We're now hearing testimony describing pre-existing tensions involving Suge and Keefe D. Then Mob James basically says, "I'm not snitching." And then things became uncomfortable for him And I noticed he would laugh a lot when he was asked questions that had to do with him telling on the Southside Crips and having to say anything about what happened the night that Tupac was shot. And then after Tupac was shot, the retaliation going on and back in Compton and in LA. He didn't want to talk about that. And the prosecutors, they started asking him questions about gang rivalries and what Macdonald knew. And he made it clear he didn't want to talk. He essentially told prosecutors that there were things people hadn't discussed for 30 years. And today wasn't going to be the day he was going to start discussing them. He said he had mentioned that he at one point he told them they had better treat him as a hostile witness. And he also indicated that he didn't want his answer to hurt Keefe D. He didn't want to be responsible for sending him to jail. And some of the questions, if he answered them, he would be getting Keefe D in trouble. So he would like have a nervous laugh, or he would get angry. And then at some point, he's kind of raising his voice. And he was visibly uncomfortable when asked certain questions. He just like laying his head on the desk, looking over at the judge, or getting into a yelling match with even Keefe D's attorney. And Keefe D's attorney, I did not understand this. Keefe D's attorney kept on digging, trying to get answers out of Keefe D, as if he wanted Keefe D to say that, I'm sorry, not Keefe D, Mob James. He was at the attorney Stance, or whatever his name is. He is Keefe D's attorney. And it wasn't the prosecution that was just throwing all these questions at Mob James that he didn't want to answer, but it was Keefe D's own attorney that was asking him so many questions, to the point where at some point he was going to eventually have Mob James even admit that Keefe D was in Vegas. And he kept saying, saying that I'm not gonna answer that question. I'm not gonna send this man to jail. Now, at some point, I'm like, whose side are you on? Like, Keefe D's attorney act like he ain't on Keefe D's side no more. I'm like, I would think that he would leave some of those questions alone. And then the fact that Mob James is saying, I don't want to be responsible for sending somebody to prison. Isn't that telling? Isn't that telling that so he must know that Keefe D is guilty of something? So by not saying something, you are saying something. But it was just, I did not understand why Keefe D's lawyer was asking him the questions he was asking him. And at some point, Keefe D's lawyer was like, answer the question. I asked you a question. It was like trying to loud talk somebody. And Mob James was like, yeah, I ain't got to answer the question. I'm a grown man. You don't tell me what to do. And then, of course, he didn't like talking about stuff that happened 30 years ago, because he said that he's a changed man. you know, and he had done things that he's ashamed of now. So just to have to go back there and remember all that stuff was just, you know, unpleasant, because he's not in that life anymore. He's a grandfather. He's trying to raise his kids and, help them to be a better person and not go down the path he went down. And, but I don't understand what Keefe D's lawyer was trying to do. I'm like, Keefe D, are you sure he on your side? He did say he was a Tupac fan, which also is weird, having him be your attorney. So, okay, but after leaving court, he told reporters that he wasn't going to help send another black man to prison. So that may have been one of the most dramatic moments of the day. And then he spoke directly to Keefe D. And Keefe D was just staring the whole time, barely flinching. You just had this intense gang member looking face. No, I don't even know if he's in gangs anymore. But he had this real intense look, like an intimidating type of look. And even though several times Mob James did a nervous laugh, or he kept saying he didn't want to send nobody to prison, Keefe D wouldn't crack a smile or a laugh or a sigh or nothing. He just was like, it's almost like he was just staring at him like, you better not say nothing, But anyway. So then he spoke directly to Keefe D. Macdonald actually addressed Keefe from the witness stand, and he said, he basically told him, what you're going through is what you're going through. I didn't want to be a part of this. Keefe reportedly showed no obvious reaction. So imagine being a juror watching that. This isn't some retired forensic expert talking about evidence. This is somebody from that world, essentially saying, I don't want anything to do with putting this man away. So the prosecution may argue that this demonstrates exactly why investigators had such difficulty getting witnesses to cooperate. So the defense may see it very differently, though. But either way, the jury saw it. So then Mob James also defended Reggie Wright Jr. And this connects directly to what we've been discussing about Russell Poole and the alternative death row theories. Macdonald rejected the idea that Reggie Wright Jr. was involved in Tupac's death. But he wasn't convinced. It's like he was kind of moving around and, kind of nervous when he was asked certain questions, and he just seemed like he's trying to be someone that he don't want to be, like he said, be responsible for somebody else's demise. Plus, he still live out there in the world, and he had grandkids and his own children, and he don't want no Southside Crips coming after him. I'm just saying. So he also testified about the security at Club 662. And according to Macdonald, his security team had guns at Club 662 that night. Now, I thought nobody had guns, but he distinguished his team from Reggie Wright Jr.'s security personnel. During jury questions, Macdonald indicated that Reggie Wright Jr.'s security team was not armed. That's important because death row security arrangements that night have fueled conspiracy theories for decades. And I thought that was interesting. It's like, oh, okay. Because in all the documentaries, it made it seem like Reggie Wright did that so that Tupac wouldn't have proper protection. But I don't know, because that's the way Frank Alexander made it seem. But anyway, so then Reggie Wright Jr. takes the stand. And this was another witness I had been waiting for. Reggie Wright Jr. is a former Compton police officer and head of security connected to Death Row Records, a man whose name has appeared in Tupac conspiracy theories for decades. So today he testified under oath. Wright discussed his background and his father, and Reggie Wright Sr., who worked for the Compton Police Department. He explained that he was responsible for Tupac's security. Normally, he said Tupac had security personnel primarily assigned to him, especially after he did that song, Hit 'Em Up. He said he had actually doubled Tupac's security after that. So here's the striking part. The night Tupac was shot, he had only one security guard. And that is going to get people talking. Where was Reggie Wright? Wright testified that he went to the MGM parking area around the Tyson fight, but didn't go inside because things looked too chaotic. He then went to Club 662. He said he learned about Tupac and Suge being shot from other people. And afterward, he went to University Medical Center where Tupac had been taken. And he contacted his father, who worked in Compton PD's game division, warning him about the MGM fight and shooting and possibility that violence could follow back in Compton. Now, prosecutors asked Reggie the question everybody has heard for 30 years. And then prosecutors addressed the elephant in the room. Reggie Wright Jr.'s name has been dragged through Tupac conspiracy theories for decades. So prosecutors asked him directly whether he had anything to do with Tupac's murder. Wright's answer was unequivocal, absolutely not. He also testified about something very personal. After Tupac was cremated, Wright said he received Tupac's ashes and made sure they reached Tupac's family. Think about that. A man who has been accused in conspiracy theories for decades is now sitting under oath telling the jury that he was the person who helped return Tupac's remains to his family. Okay. Now, who came to court today? We know members of Tupac's family were present, and one family member identified in today's reporting was Tupac's cousin, Zayed, the one that he stayed through the painful autopsy evidence because he said understanding what happened helps with the closure and the grieving process. So other relatives were present as well, although the reliable reporting does not identify every family member by name. So I'm not going to guess and tell and say that Mo Cream or Secular or Billy Garland or anyone else was there unless I can verify it. And I haven't seen reliable confirmation tonight that major celebrities such as Snoop Dogg, Dre, Mike Tyson, or Jada Pinkett Smith attended either. So, all right, and then there was drama outside the courthouse. There was also a frightening moment around the courthouse. Reports of gunfire near the courthouse prompted a substantial police response around lunchtime. Authorities responded, but reporting indicated that no victims or confirmed shooting scene were located, and the Tupac trial later resumed. So that's crazy. So at this point, there's no evidence I've seen establishing um, that the reported gunfire had anything to do with the Keefe D trial. But my biggest takeaways from day 2 is that today's testimony gave me several things to watch. Number 1, the prosecution established Tupac's death medically as a homicide caused by gunshot wounds. Number 2, the jury saw the MGM beating. That's critical to the prosecution retaliation theory. Number 3, Orlando Anderson apparently told police after the MGM incident that he had been jumped by people he didn't know, didn't want medical attention, and didn't want charges pursued. Now, I know he knew that it was Tupac, but I guess he just following that street code. Number 4, we got physical crime scene evidence and testimony suggesting a .40 caliber Glock. And then number 5, Mob Jane testified that the conflict wasn't simply Tupac versus Orlando, and he described tension involving Suge Knight and Keefe D. So then Mob James essentially told prosecutors, "I'm not helping you send this man to prison." And then that showed this jury right in front of their faces how difficult getting cooperation from witnesses connected to this world can be. Then number 7, Reggie Wright Jr. was a man accused for decades in alternative Tupac theories, and finally answered the question under oath. Did you participate in Tupac's murder? And his answer was absolutely not. So just like an accusation doesn't establish guilt, that's why we're watching the evidence. So we still haven't reached what I consider the heart of this case, and I want to hear who independently places Keefe D inside that Cadillac, who independently places Orlando inside that Cadillac, who identified the shooter, what happened with those photo lineups, what did Frank Alexander actually see, what did other witnesses say before Keefe started giving interviews, what will Greg Kading say, will Suge Knight testify, and what happens when Keefe D's own words finally come before this jury, because that's where this case could become explosive. So that is it for tonight, y'all. I am tired. Stay tuned for tomorrow's recap. And thank you for watching.